Hello, everybody. Okay, in this video, we're going to be finishing up the identity series. And I'm going to be teaching you basically how to find your identity in a very practical way so you're able to get a better grip and sense of who you are. And towards the end of the video, I'm going to basically give you the last conclusive remarks, and some ideas, some questions regarding the whole Erik Erikson and identity thing that I got from the classes that I've been teaching on this recently. Okay, so first you need to know, those two things. I'm going to be teaching you how to find your identity, as well as making some remarks on Erik Erikson and identity, so we can finally put this topic to rest, right? We conclude this topic today. So in order to find your identity, the first thing you need to do is answer the question, who do you identify with? And you need to write down their names. Now, this could be, I need you to really think about this. This may take some moment. You can walk around with a notebook, a little notebook, or in your phone, write down the names of all the people that you think have had an influence on you, that you think that you have liked, right? That you have identified with. So this could be movie stars, characters, family members, right? And what you're going to do ultimately is categorize them. And the categorization doesn't really work as much as in an organization system as it does a way for you to have more people in your head about this, right? To bring up more people, basically. Because it's hard to think about this. If you really think about this, you may think about one or two or three people, but you're not going to remember everybody. So you need the categories to kind of say like, oh yeah, the people that are this or that, right? The categories can be many different things, and I'm going to give you some categories that you can use, and then I'm going to tell you which categories I used. So you can use the category first of famous people, celebrities, historical people, historical figures, family and friends, people you know currently in your life, fictional characters from movies, series, or stories, people from your past, people from your present, artists, like people from music, people from your job, people from work, people from school, right? People from elementary, middle school, high school, university, some courses that you've taken along the way, training, right? Comedians, leaders, world leaders, or just leaders of any sort, content creators, gurus or self-help coaches. And if you dare, which is the one that I used, zodiac signs, right? So you go through the whole zodiac, the 12 zodiac signs, and you say, okay, the people, and see, this is easier for me because I kind of know who they are. The people that have influenced me that are Aries, the people that have influenced me that are Tauruses, the people that have influenced me that are Geminis, and so on throughout the 12 zodiac signs, right? So this is what I did, but you can also do it according to profession, right? According to birthday months, according to age, gender, right? That may be a good one to kind of simplify. According to nationality, marital status, right? Etc. You can basically come up with any type of category. There's also another category, which again, I think you may have to be a little bit knowledgeable about, but if you are, you can use it. Consider using archetypes, right? This is from Carl Jung. Carl Jung's archetypes, or archetypes in general, like the rebel, right? Which for me was something in the 3 different moments in which I lived in my life. The rebel, the joker, the magician, right? But yeah, I'm not going to mention like specifically because this is a very personal activity, right? It's kind of private. Okay, so the thing is, once you have your categories, you're going to have a list of people in each category, right? In some lists, there may be more than in others, right? More people than in others, and that's okay. But what you need to do ultimately is rearrange that and quantify it. So the way you quantify it, like for example, me, you figure out how many Geminis you have how many Virgos you have. Like for me, Geminis and Virgos were the most, right? And it kind of makes sense because they're Mercurian, so they're communicative. 7 Geminis and 7 Virgos, they were tied. And the least amount of people were, I think it was a tie between Aquarius, Cancers, and Leos. And it kind of makes sense because Cancer and Leo are like more emotional. They say that's like the deepest family, right? And they're right next to each other. Gemini and Virgo have a opposite. No, they have a correlation with Mercury, with the planet, and Cancer and Leo have a correlation because they're right next to each other, and they're the closest that a child is. For example, when they're age, I think 3 to 7, they're the most connected with their family or something like that. Aquarius is also in there. I actually had two for them at one moment, but then I remembered someone else and I added that person in. And you also classify them. As soon as you have quantified them, you kind of get an idea of how many people you have. I had 56 people. And then you go from most influential to least influential, right? You rearrange them in like first you place them according to how you remember them, right? Like first person I remember is this, second person I remember is this. But now you revisit that list and now you're going to classify them according to the most influential to the least influential from that list, right? So yeah, you do that, classify them in categories, that is from people you most identify with or have identified with to the people you have least identified or identify with. Next, in each person, you're going, and this is going to take some time, right? You're not going to do this in one day. But next, in each person, you're going to write down underneath that person exactly what it is about them that you like, right? Ultimately, you're going to answer the question and write down the answer to the question, why do I identify with this person? What is it about this person that I like, right? So that may take some time. For instance, I had 56 people categorized based on the zodiac. And this activity is pretty interesting because you're going to start to see a lot of qualities that you value in other people as well as in yourself. But you're also going to start to notice how some of these value systems or qualities or characteristics that you value in other people are kind of old, right? Because some of them come from like years ago, right? Okay, anyway, once you have done this, you put together a list of reasons and or qualities, right? And this can be done from going basically to your most favorite quality to your least favorite quality. Now, I'm currently on this step because, like I mentioned, this is time consuming. It takes a long time to do this. And I don't think I'm going to finish this, but I do at least have my 56 people and what I like about them specifically. And I kind of view that in myself, right? So this activity is kind of to help you view that in yourself. But then if you proceed with the activity of classifying those qualities or those characteristics, you're going to basically set up a value system, which I spoke about in the other identity video on how to redevelop it, right? Or how to, like update it, I think. It's called redevelopment, that video. And basically here you can like figure out what you value most, right? Now, there is a final step which I thought was interesting and which I may do in the future. But finally, after you have the qualities, you need to see if there are any missing qualities from the list that you yourself are, but that you haven't found in other people, so to say, right? And this is going to tie in to something I'm going to talk about towards the end of the video, which is called private identity. Because I think what we've been talking about a lot is social identity, how other people view you, how you view yourself through other people and based on other people. But there's also a private identity, which is a little deeper and narrower. But those are qualities that I think may even come from yourself, like independent of other people's influence, right? Kind of like genetic, or you're just naturally like that, like temperaments, right? We would be talking about that. So yeah, see if there are any qualities missing from the list and include them, right? And also set them in a hierarchy, put them in the hierarchy, right? Now, there are many other things that you could do. Like, for example, you could correlate, which I think would be more time consuming, but it would be like a great learning journey. I may do this in the future, I don't know. But you could correlate them with Erik Erikson's stages, right? I still don't really know what to do with Erik Erikson's stages because I think they're so interesting, they're so intriguing. But yeah, especially like the, guilt and shame versus like autonomy and industriousness, and there's so much you can do with that and identify yourself with that, right? Okay, well, basically that's how to find your identity. Now let me give you some closing remarks on this whole topic of Erik Erikson and identity. And a lot of this is going to come from what I've seen my students present in class. So the first thing is the first stage, which is trust versus distrust, is actually essential for any type of activity that you undertake later in life, right? Think about when you start a new job, when you move to a new city, right? The first thing you need is to develop the trust, right? You have distrust, but how do you develop trust? Well, you need consistency, and you need for things to be familiar at the very beginning of anything, right? Kind of like a baby needs to feel that consistency and familiarity with things so they're able, through the order, then develop their potential, right? And this is for anything, and for continuity, which identity in a nutshell is a unified and continual self-image, right? Erik Erikson talks a lot about this, how or in his biography, I was reading a lot about how your identity is basically a unified version of yourself. So you're in agreement. All of your parts are in agreement. They're unified, and they're able to coexist through time, right? So it's not like just a moment. That's your identity. And when you have an identity crisis, it's because you're missing that, right? You're ultimately either not unified, a part of you is missing from that unification, or you're not that person throughout time, right? You're modifying and constantly changing, and there's really no order, right? Which you do have to change, but you need to change kind of like on your own terms and with your own resources, right? So you need to have those resources for facing challenges which may be difficult for you to face, and changes, crisis, which may be difficult for you to change. In stage 8, which is the last one, so I'm jumping from the first one to the last one. I'm going to be jumping around in this video on these notes. But basically here I have a couple questions on a variety of topics, but this one, is there a correlation between having lived a fulfilled life and the acceptance of death? So basically, the more fulfilled you are in that last stage, which is the one closest to death, right? Integrity versus despair. The more you are fulfilled in life, or the more you feel you're fulfilled in life, the more you accept death. And the less fulfilled you feel, the less you accept death. Is there a correlation between those two ideas? Also, I noticed that people tend to admire people who have suffered, right? I'm guilty of this. I admire Viktor Frankl, for example, in my Aries category. I think he's like one of the first ones in Aries. And I saw students like talk about Lady Gaga, right? And everything, like all the suffering that she's been through. And people will talk about other people that have suffered kind of like in that admiration tone, right? Like, I value this person, I admire this person, look at what they went through, and and they were able to come out of it, right? They were able to overcome that. So is there also a correlation between suffering and admiration? The more a person suffers, the more people admire them. The less they suffer, the less they admire them. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Okay, and someone said, because I had my students do interviews, someone in the 8th stage, so this is a senior citizen, said there is only one identity per person, which I thought was kind of interesting. It kind of made me think. At first I was like, no, what do you mean? You could have multiple identities. But is he talking about an integrated identity made up of different identities? Or am I just overthinking this? What do you think that means? There is only one identity per person. Is this true? I don't know, kind of makes you think. Okay, during the generative and stagnation stage, this is a common saying, but I wrote it down. you contribute ultimately by being an example, right? So this is the stage where, like, typically people have kids or are doing things for their community and giving back to their society. And one of the ways in which you do this is by being an example, right? Which is the way you show yourself, which I think does have some truth in it. Ultimately, how you handle yourself, if you're responsible, people see that and then they will try to mimic that, right? And that's how you transmit values, right? A lot of times they say children aren't what their parents say they are, but what they see they are, right? Or how they really act, right? What they model, not what they say, right? It's like if a mother says don't smoke, but they're smoking, what do you think the child's gonna do? Not smoke, right? Probably not. Another notion is that identity is ego, and ego is not bad. Ego is what you're made up of. It's your consciousness, right? It's not all you are, but it is important, right? A lot of people nowadays talk about as if ego is a bad thing, right? But it's your identity. That's your ego. Very interesting. Need versus shame, right? And this, I think, makes reference to Erik Erikson's stage on shame. This person said in an interview, I do whatever I need to do only when the need arises, right? I'll talk, right? Like maybe they're shy of talking or they're shy to talk. Excuse me. But they said, I'll talk and put aside my shame when something is needed. So ultimately, this begs the question, like, people that are very shy or that feel very embarrassed or, they feel a lot of shame, is the only way to defeat that shame with necessity, right? Because then these people will say, well, I won't do it unless I see the need, unless I see the necessity, right? They may not have that initiative because they feel so embarrassed, because they're so sensible, right? Things like this. So influence makes you change your identity a little. Like, for example, when you go to school or you take a new course, right, on something, ultimately in those moments, I think what you're asking for is transformation of your identity, right? Just think about that. If you go to school to learn something, or if you take a course on something, you're asking for someone else, you're even paying someone else to change you in little ways, right? So this gets done little by little. In the identity stage of Erik Erikson, I think his most famous one, identity versus role confusion or identity crisis. I think the reason why people get confused in that stage is because for the first time you're seeing that you have multiple roles, right? And some of those roles differ, but not only that, oftentimes they just plain contradict one another, right? So you're kind of like confused. But they are needed. All of those different roles that have even contradicting qualities are needed in life, right? Because life is made up of contradictions. Like, think about being a student, right? Like in high school, but having to work, or being responsible for your family, right? And doing your homework, but also having to look cool for your classmates by not doing your homework, right? And you're living those two roles, and it's kind of like confusing, like, what do I do, right? But I think that's how life is ultimately, because I'll give you some examples that I asked ChatGPT on. Individualism versus collectivism. You have to take care of yourself, but you also have to look after other people, right? So you have to balance those two contradictions. Tradition versus progress. You need to hang on to things that are valuable, tradition, but you also need to let go of certain things in order for there to be progress, right? Contradiction. Or you need to attend to your logical sense, right? Your rationality, but you also need to tend to your heart, to your emotions, right? Again, contradiction, right? And life is made up of that. Contradictions coexist, and we need to learn to live with those contradictions, which at first I understand why there's an identity crisis, there's a shock, right? Like, oh, what? Like, I have to be this person, but I also have to be this person. This makes no sense. I'm going crazy, and hormones, because it happens during the teenage years, right? But yeah, you get used to it. Okay, then students came up with very specific, awesome examples. I think some of the best ones were Geppetto and Pinocchio for generative versus stagnation, for the generative versus stagnation stage. I mean, the guy makes a boy, a puppet boy, and then he brings him to life. That's, if that's not generative, if that's not trying to be like a parent or trying to be a role model for a future generation, I don't know what is, right? That was a perfect example. Carl from the movie Up, for integration versus despair, right? He's old and he's trying to, I haven't watched that movie, but well, I have, but a long time ago. But I think he's trying to integrate that and trying to come to like trying to extract meaning from his life, right? Especially after he's lost his wife and he's alone. I also saw the movie Wild Strawberries, which was recommended in Erik Erikson's biography, which spoke about this stage in a film perspective, or in a movie. And yeah, this guy's reflecting back on his life. It was kind of slow, but I got the idea, right? It's a guy that's remembering different moments in his past. And again, he's old. The actor actually died 2 or 3 years after making the movie, right? And he was like, I think, in his 70s. So I thought that was an interesting thing. In intimacy and despair, intimacy versus despair, this is a great tip. You need to set clear boundaries, right? So this means you can have intimacy, but in order, no, sorry, this isn't intimacy versus despair. This is intimacy versus isolation. So in order, this is the moment of like Friends, How I Met Your Mother, Big Bang Theory, where you're like in your 20s and 30s and you're trying to find, who you're going to live with for the rest of your life. And I think it's a good tip. You need to set clear boundaries. Like, I'm not going to end up alone and excluded from society, but I'm also not going to be codependent of other people and whoring around, right? You need to set clear boundaries because, that's ultimately how you're going to find that balance. I think that was a great idea. And I just want to briefly talk about fear, how I think fear is present in the identity stage as well as in the trust stage. So they're very similar. I see a lot of resemblance between the first stage, trust versus distrust, and the identity versus role confusion stage. And I think a lot of it is fueled by fear, right? Fear, I think, is the ultimate primitive emotion that people experience, especially when facing the unknown. So, you're confused when you're in your identity crisis. And, when you're a baby, you don't really know about emotions, but I guess you still feel fear if you're not able to trust your surroundings, right? Okay, so food for thought, just a couple of questions. The first one is changing, so when you change your personality or you grow or develop or whatever, or mature, is that losing your identity? Do you lose part of your identity when that happens? Because I saw some interviews from students where they asked people, like teenagers, if they have ever doubted themselves, and all of them said no. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean you have never doubted yourself? Like, that's kind of being cocky. And I'm going to get into that in a moment. But yeah, is changing your identity the same as losing your identity or parts of your identity? Let me know what you think. And the question, who are you, right? But in the deep sense, let's get deep with this question. Who are you really? What do you conclude from all this, right? And you can talk with someone about this and maybe report your findings in the comments section, right? I think that would be interesting. So yeah, back to the question, do you ever doubt yourself? I think for people that answer no, it may mean, I don't know, tentatively, it may mean that they're stubborn and unwilling to change. That's just my idea. Let me know what you think. But if you are asked, do you ever doubt yourself, and you answer yes, I think that shows an openness and a willingness to change, right? An openness to learning and to changing. Okay, and finally, let me get into this topic a little bit about social identity versus private identity. And I thought it was great that this idea came across me. I don't remember how. I was watching a video or something, but I wrote it down immediately, and I was like, yes, I need to distinguish, because everything we've been seeing in this identity series has been in relation to social identity. And we're kind of forgetting about private identity. Now, let me define this a little bit. Social identity, they're interconnected. But social identity is basically like the roles that are already out there, right? Kind of like finding your identity. I'm kind of like Sherlock Holmes because, I like knowing things and I like being able to solve things and whatever, no? So that's like your social identity, but you're basing yourself off somebody, right? Your private identity is made up of your private thoughts. I would even call them like your secrets, right? Andrew Bustamante makes this distinction on how we have like three lives. We have the public life, we have the personal life, and then we have the private life. And the public life is like what anybody can see. Some person in Japan can see this life of mine on social media, whatever. The personal life is kind of like your friends, the close people to you, it's a little bit more private. And then your private life, only you know it, right? So I think that's where your private identity is. It's made up of your private thoughts, which nobody knows, your private beliefs, your experiences, right? Which I think this part makes, and I asked ChatGPT what the difference was, and I got a strong emphasis being made on experiences. It's ultimately made up of, I think, like raw and pure subjectivity, because it's based on your experiences, what you have, how you have interpreted and digested those experiences, and what you make of them, right? What you value from them, what you've learned from them. And I think your personal values, right? Independent of all else. That's something I say. So the ChatGPT does say your private identity is narrower, right, than your social identity values, which again, you can find people maybe easily that can connect with, like just on Facebook, there are groups. If you identify with, I don't know, Iron Man, there's probably a group of Iron Man lovers and you all share that same value system, right? But if you're like, I don't know, I really value, I don't know, something weird, like something private, like something that's hard for other people to maybe even understand. Like I can't give you examples, maybe because it's private, but I don't know, man. Let me know if you have any examples of private identity qualities or characteristics. Okay, and just to finish off this series and this video, I want to say that I think it's important for you to find and know who you are, find your identity, but never sacrifice a new potential idea, a new potential identity, growing, changing, transforming, developing for an already established identity, right? Like me right now, let me give you this example. My objective with like the videos that I'm making is basically the notion from Sartre's biography. There's a video, I think, from Way Too Human, where at the end of it, they say that Sartre was like a moral compass. And when he died, people said like, we're not going to have our moral compass anymore. We're not going to know, what to think about things. We're not going to be able to ask Sartre what he thinks about something when something happens, right? And I thought that was like, wow, I think that's like my ultimate goal, to get to that level. Which again, this was said of him after he died, so maybe people didn't even believe that when he was alive. I don't know. Sartre was kind of weird like that, but that's my ideal, right? My identity ideal, my motivation, kind of like my value, where my value system comes from, especially by making these videos. But I shouldn't get stubborn about that. I shouldn't get dogmatic about that, because if something better comes along, I have to be able to let that go and move on to the next best thing, right? So just keep that in mind. You are who you are right now in the present, but in the future that can change, just as it has from the past to the present, right? So always be thinking about evolution and growing and learning and becoming a better version of yourself, right? So yeah, this concludes the identity series. Let me know what you think about the series or about this video, and I'll see you in the next one, all right? Peace.